Okay, so now we're going to review some of those aesthetic phrases that we've been discussing. And before we do, I want to remind you that these aesthetic phrases have repeating themselves in various styles and trends throughout history. And also that they may not be your aesthetic choices, but they seem to find their way into the lexicon over and over and over again. So I think it's worth repeating or going over some of those. And then, as I said, you will look for your own. Let's start with one of the earlier ones. We said, okay, so for instance, in the archaic Greek, we discussed the strong shoulder, right, and the narrowness of the hip. Even more so, more like this. And then we're coming out and down like this. So one leg is in front of the other. Okay. So we have that strong, broad shoulder, right? Masculine. And very square. And then it cuts in. And also the waist is really prevalent in this case, in both masculine and the female. And then we're pulling down this way from the external oblique. It's a very small external oblique in here, and then into the genitalia. Then we've got this, and it's also really super symmetrical, balanced. So that's one thought, and then building on that as we begin to move along.
Welcome to New Masters Academy, the best place to get art education online. Master the skills of figure drawing, painting, sculpting, and much more with the guidance of world-renowned artists. Embark on your creative journey today at anime.art.
We see the development of that. This begins to be broader. Still here, we still have this. We keep it really simple. There's more pitch in the chest. We're coming down as we hit the waistline. Instead of this very narrow, we get a little bit more in the thigh. So there's a little more curve coming. And a little more attention giving to the rhythms of the form. Not quite so straightforward, but a little more curve given to it. Now, again, there is a symmetry, a step slightly forward. And so this becomes something that we see again and again. And then once we reach the classical Greek, over here, we still have the square shoulder, but the masculine body has, acknowledged the obliques. Instead of hitting from here to here to here, we are now bringing in the rib cage like this. Still long neck, and our subject's head begins to turn, slightly tipped, begins to turn. Long neck, broad, right? Broader here too. And one arm drops down, and we start to feel the weight of it. Don't feel that so much on the archaic models. You can cross-check that. But now, in this particular case, we have a subject which is leaning a little bit towards stepping out. Because what we have now is a figure that moves more weight onto one leg than the other, right? And we now have a new measurement from here to here and here to here. And that goes basically to the trochanter, cutting across. This squares up. In the previous models, they're pretty much like this. But this now squares up. Again, more masculine shape. This leg is out. And because this hip is higher, this knee is higher, this one drops. Right. Okay. And there's a new kind of rhythm. The little center is over here a little more. Okay. The arm is now up. So it begins to become a little more active, right? Arm is up. This is down. And the hand. Not a lot of weight to that hand. I think we better bring it down a little more. So the elbow is about in here. The wrist is about here. Something like that. Okay, so stepping out. Okay. Taking a look at the female model now. We've got the male. We have a narrower chest. She's also moved her weight onto one leg, somewhat like that. This swings down. Now we feel this big, long rhythm. And this stepping out, and this. All right, so narrower. Ribs might be more like this, rather than this more rounded form. She is, again, the neck is going off this way and her head is tipped. Interesting. This says something about the cervical vertebrae and what they can do. That is, C1 and C2 allow the head to turn in a different way than the neck goes. Just a little subtle thing. Anyway, she's looking now off. So the movement begins. We realize that with her, even more than the male, that she's aware of the world and that the world is aware of her. Her arm is also up. She has material in her hand. It's coming across. And she has the long neck and the sloping shoulder, whereas in the male we have a wider neck. It's not short, but it's a wider neck. And we're much squarer across here. She's sloping. And as I said, she's aware of the world and aware that the world is aware of her. And so we get this modesty, right? Hand down. All right. You see the curves beginning to take place. Very different than over here. Okay, if we move on, then we see that, interestingly, that Michelangelo is back to the square shoulder, something like this, and his hips are this way. This is the David. His arm is out, hand is up. You'll notice the same here and here. It's this kind of one arm down, one arm up. There's a kind of sense or feeling for that. This asymmetry is repeated. So one begins to really feel the attention that Michelangelo has given to the Greeks. And again, stepping out. And the David is obviously involved in his story. His look or gaze is in this direction. So this is what I was saying. We feel the mythical characteristic, right, of our characters by this point, as opposed to the iconic here. They don't seem to be so much engaged in the world as that they are a representation of a higher ideal. Okay, we begin to move into the world. It begins to become more human. With the Egyptian, you began to realize at the beginning of civilization that they began to be clearer about their relationship with forces, and they gave those forces personifications with God's names. So now we have this down to here. It's the same, remember? But we're also with Michelangelo aware of this cut. So we have this long cut from here to here, this long perception with the short. We have the long with the short here. This cuts in, something like that. But he's also allowed us to be aware of the earlier aspect, which is actually more feminine, more boyish, but he keeps the strong shoulder at the same time. So in a certain sense, he's taking and mixing the ideas to create yet another sense, or another sense, changing the aesthetic a bit. This is not quite so square in here. This pulls down more like a combination between the archaic and the classical Greek, and so on. So then it's coming here. This will do, say something like that. All right. Knee is heading in this direction. Right. Okay, rhythmically, you see. So along this line, you've got these subdominant rhythms. You've got the big aesthetic rhythm of the large forms, and the secondary rhythm that, like a vine, wrap themselves around the trellis of the large rhythm. All right. Okay. And you'll see that there's just a slight slope, but basically it's square, broad, but it cuts in, it narrows in, a lot like the female. This is female, I like that. And the Greek is pretty square. All right. Michelangelo's slight taper. All right. See these variables, these variations. So you see the aesthetic changes, and at the same time, it tries to accomplish the same thing, this kind of visual appeal to the eye. When we get over to Botticelli, Botticelli is actually reflecting the nicest aspects of everything that's come before it. She's swinging around, this Venus, swinging around, down, very rhythmic, here, 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 right? And she comes up and her head tipped. The neck actually goes that way, and again, the head tips off. This is really an interesting thing. Notice on the Greek here, and this is the same. Botticelli is the same, right? We have the slope, and the slope, and the cutting in, and the cutting in, and then back. Now this whole thing has a feeling something like that. And in this case, she's not exactly on the ground, right? But she's coming into the world, and she's aware of the world, and the world is aware of her. She's coming in with a kind of flame about her. But there's also a modesty about her. And we see that here, right? We have the modesty to the wrist. And modesty here, exhibited here, with her hand across the breast. Great deal of grace. We see a little bit of the breast here, down at the navel, right? Get a sense. I'm just trying to give you a sense of the broad feeling of this. All right, okay. Supposing I just draw it down here. Here's the head. Here's the neck on that interesting angle, see? And, really, if you look at the Venus, you'll notice that she also narrow, long. She's also narrow, long. And, of course, the African masks make it even more so. He's extending this up, extending it up even more. But this is coming down, very graceful, and then we have a high sloping shoulder down. Again, the arm is across, and this arm is over here, I want to remind you. and it comes this way. Notice that I'll remind you that I said earlier that she's more open. She's not actually covering herself like Venus here, right? This particular Venus. She's starting to open up, swinging. This arm actually comes across, but it doesn't actually hide. She's not only hiding here, but she's using these long tresses to also be part of that. Okay. All right, so if we come into the modern sector with the kind of the fashion model, we'll take this transition of beginning the female beginning to open up. So there's a kind of a new sense. The female is beginning to see herself and her role, and therefore the sense of aesthetic is changing already at the early 20th century. So now in the early 21st century, we get a female that is broad-shouldered, head is up and back, right? Long neck, but broad, so there's a masculine aspect. She's aware of us. Just do it that way. She's aware that we are paying attention to her. All right. And we've got one hip high. So we have this. Okay. Again, notice that the poses on these figures are really fairly similar. And in this case, open. Look at the early archaic figure here. The arms are straight down to the side. And on hers, we see that she's intentionally open. She's actually pulling open her little jacket there. Right? Shoulders made to look even broader, open. She's aware of us, looking straight at us. Right? She's extending the look of her leg by wearing shorts. Let's do that here. And the curves are actually much subtler. And as such, they make us really feel the length of the leg, even more so. I said before, if the shorts had been shorter and, she were wearing maybe some Dr. Martin boots or something, that would even make the leg more obvious. All right. So now you see the shifting paradigm, the shifting idea of who we are seems to influence our aesthetic. But then she's got this hat. Now, notice that this hat, how similar that is to the hair style of the Modigliani, right? And the hair is pulling down this way. In the earlier case of the archaic, even here, you still have that look. Narrow neck, this, you got this. A lot of themes repeat themselves. And the style changes, but also the aesthetic changes because the idea of who we are changes as we move along. I think that's interesting. So what we're looking at then is, I think, aesthetic phrases. They have a tendency to find their way into the current lexicon of feeling about what appeals to us, both to the eye and to our emotions, and what we respond to, what we're attracted by, and so on. And I'm just suggesting a few. Remember, this is a conversation. It's not an easy thing to talk about aesthetics. It can easily be confused with style and trends and certainly other things like that. So I would think that it might be fun for you to investigate and find, in a way, your own aesthetic. More so today than any other time, it's possible to create one's own personal aesthetic. Um, but first, you have to realize that you are responding to trends of all kinds, and you really kind of need to become aware of that before you can separate that um, those choices from choices that you might make for yourself.